Today, Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed and arguably the most powerful man in the world of finance, someone that can move markets to complete carnage or new all-time highs through a single few words, very similar to Donald Trump, made a statement in his speech today that was quite shocking. What makes this even more interesting is that not only were all eyes on him and virtually every single market was waiting for this speech to end, but Jerome Powell actually met with Donald Trump on May 29th in a private meeting. And people are wondering what was happening in that meeting. Now, many people are speculating that they really do not like each other. And we've actually seen that in a speech a little over 6 months ago where someone actually asked Jerome Powell, would you resign if Donald Trump asked you to which Jerome Powell kind of laughed it off and straight up said, there's no way in hell. In other words, it's constantly been a battle between these two, and any type of uncertainty could cause the markets to sell off in fear. As Trump told Powell, he's making a mistake on rates recently, and this is directly from the Wall Street Journal. This is information that they came across, and we're going to cover in this video and why it matters for XRP holders. We also have news surrounding the Genius Act, arguably one of the most important pieces of legislation to ever happen for crypto that recently passed at the Senate, but then they had to make some concessions. And so now we're in limbo. All of this while the stock market actually climbed a bit higher as trade tensions with China have consistently risen. And in all fairness, who can expect China to keep up their end of the deal with the United States? They are our number one opponent when it comes to trade. But even with Bitcoin and the S&P reclaiming some local highs, XRP has yet again touched down at that $2.08 range and is bouncing slightly, currently sitting at $2.20, but is struggling to get back into true bull market territory. And the news with Jerome Powell and Donald Trump and the trade tensions in China could lead markets to sell off even deeper. So if you're an XRP holder, you're going to want to pay attention to this video. And also, before we dive into the video, if you haven't had a shot to already, head on over to Bull Runners HQ on X or Twitter and check out the pinned post. Shout out to Brad Meese for winning our last $100 worth of XRP giveaway. Every single week, we give another $100 worth of XRP to one lucky winner, and you need to do 3 things in order to enter. It's actually really straightforward. First, follow Bull Runners HQ on this account, like, retweet, and comment XRP below on this pinned post, and then subscribe to our daily crypto newsletter. And when you actually do that, pretty straightforward, you're going to get a free ebook on the other side called Altcoin Secrets, which gives you the 23 secrets to becoming a crypto millionaire. So either way, the value is totally there, even if you didn't enter, because all you have to do is enter your email and we will send that ebook directly to your inbox. And then once you're on the other side, you're going to see a video that shows you how to discover the top 50 to 100x altcoins with this platform and with the Bull Runners. So go ahead and check that out. Either way, go ahead and enter for your chance to win $100 worth of XRP. And it's completely random. Not everyone always fills out the steps. Like I say over and over and over again, we actually double verify that someone did all of the steps before we give any money away to a winner. And yes, it's completely random every single week. So go to Bull Runners HQ, check out the pin post, follow through those steps, and I will see you on the other side. It's been a while since we've talked about Jerome Powell or anything over at the Fed on this channel, or at least that I have done that. However, aside from Donald Trump, this man can move markets. And just today at 1 p.m. Eastern time, he spoke. And anytime he speaks, the markets sit silent and wait or even shudder in their seat, because if this man talks about tightening, it will cause fear in the markets and they will likely sell. If he talks about QE or quantitative easing, they will pump. On both the short sides and the long sides, people are going to lose big. Anytime he talks about this stuff, any hints of QE or rate cuts would have pumped the markets hard. And so far on the day, markets are up. The S&P 500 was up about 1.3%. Bitcoin rallied off of that low for 2.2%. And XRP made a very similar move at 3%. Now you're going to notice something really interesting, right? Why is XRP up more than Bitcoin? Why is Bitcoin up more than the S&P? And this is a very straightforward answer. It all comes down to the market cap and liquidity in that market. Because there is far less liquidity in XRP, it's going to pump on the same amount of money far harder than something like Bitcoin would. In other words, if I dump $1 billion into Bitcoin, it's going to require sheer mass or volume in terms of dollars in order to move that market 3%. Whereas if I did the exact same thing on something like XRP, it could pump way harder because it is a smaller market. And the order books are typically less full for a market like XRP. One easy way to prove this is by heading over to CoinGlass and looking at the liquidation maps. And as you can see, if I go ahead and turn off on the Binance and just basically turn off all of these exchanges and focus solely on the amount of leverage on something like Bitcoin, whether it's the short side or the long side, you can see that there's about $3 billion of longs, at least in the futures market, with Binance, OKX, and Bybit combined. And there's only about $1.5 billion of shorts. Now, if I come over to something like XRP, you'll notice it's a far smaller amount of money. We're talking to the tune of only $60 million in shorts and $84 million in longs. So yes, I expect the market to be long slightly more right now. However, what Jerome Powell shared is truly shocking. And at this point in time, he's not really misleading the market or saying anything that spooked the market, but it's more so about reading between the lines on what he shared with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which after World War II became the gold standard, and then we hopped off the gold standard in the 70s, I believe under Nixon. This is when all of these global superpowers alongside the United States decided to make the dollar the world reserve currency, backed by gold first, and then the full faith of the United States government. This is when they created the World Bank and the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, to stabilize global financial markets. And this is why players like China don't really want to be reliant on the United States for trade. However, they have to be if they want to play in a global economy. So yes, China is not going to play clean. They're going to play dirty, and they're going to hit back on trade. But even with that, markets still rallied a little bit. And I would argue it's because we have a little bit more certainty and there's less uncertainty based on what he shared. But again, if you read between the lines, it was quite shocking. Let's have a listen to what Jerome Powell actually said at this latest speech today.
Had emerged from World War II as a global economic superpower. The Bretton Woods Agreement placed the U.S. and the Fed in a central position in the global economy. Our mission then, as it is now, was to serve the American people. But it was clear at that moment that the Fed needed to have better knowledge of global developments to achieve our dual mandate goals. A 1948 memo proposing to create the division stated, quoting, "Problems of international economics and finance have become increasingly large, complex, and significant in recent years, and our foreign economic relations will undoubtedly continue to give rise to issues of the first magnitude." That rare economic forecast that has turned out to be spot on. 75 years later, it remains critical that the Fed understand the policies and practices of other governments and central banks and their implications for the U.S. economy and for financial markets. Exchange rate policy, of course, is now firmly in the hands of the U.S. Treasury. However, the end of the Bretton Woods era in the 1970s fundamentally changed the conduct of monetary policy, as policymakers had to understand the effects of potentially more volatile movements of the U.S. dollar on American families and businesses. Understanding global trade and capital movements has only grown in importance since 1950, as we saw during the pandemic.
And it almost sounds like a bunch of financial or even legalistic jargon. But again, when you read between the lines, basically what he's stating is fiat currencies used to be backed by something under the Bretton Woods Agreement. When that ended and we hopped off the gold standard, we had no more direct convertibility for anything of real value. This is what turbocharged central banks to print their way out of problems and create all sorts of other issues when it comes to the foreign exchange markets. So at the end of the day, he is basically admitting that we are nearing the end of this fiat global currency system, and that fundamentally the Fed can no longer play by the same rules and remain in complete power forever, as many central banks or even countries around the world are also dumping bonds and losing faith in the US government and no longer trust the fiscal responsibility of our own bankers. Now, in the long term, this is really great for the crypto market because Bitcoin is that new standard that a lot of people believe. And whether you believe it or not, the market has already proven that to be the case with over a $2 trillion market cap and consistent Bitcoin dominance rising. But this is also going to lead the rest of the crypto market and the best players in the space, players like XRP, to do well. Again, in the long term. In the short term, this can create for, again, more turbulence where people might sell at a discount out of panic and fear. And at the end of the day, you have to understand that fund managers also sell in situations where they could see a bit of volatility because they don't want to carry through that volatility. And they would rather buy back in a little higher if they know they have more of a certain trade. So everything is kind of really interesting in how Jerome Powell shared this. But either way, the markets took it as bullish, but not terribly bullish, because if it was terribly bullish, we'd be up far higher. Still, XRP is bouncing off those lows at about 214 consistently on the bottom and has been trading up a bit with some wicks on the downside. But relatively speaking, this is a pretty weak pump when you actually look at the volume. So it's very much possible that volume, as it's declining, is just going to be a retrace. And if we dump below the $2.12 range, I do believe things are going to go lower from here. Now, speaking of another act of uncertainty for the markets, it's the fact that now the Senate is weighing on whether or not to pass the Bipartisan Genius Act this week, which again would have to make its way into the House. But this was a huge step forward as both Democrats and Republicans voted in majority to pass this bill. They still wanted some amendment negotiations inside of this bill before it passes fully, and it has to come to a close by June 9th, which we're creeping up on and would be 1 week from now. And as a side note, if this act does not pass, I don't think the markets are going to dump by any means. I just don't think it's going to be a very positive sign that anyone in Washington is actually going to move anything forward at a legitimate pace, which again can cause fear in crypto markets. And I also really wanted to share this interesting article again from the Wall Street Journal, and I don't take everything they share as complete and total truth. Sure, there's bias, but they do a pretty good job of sharing information most of the time, and I'm good at negating, or better yet, looking past biases in language. Either way, this is quite interesting, and it's actually a really cool photo. Let me get out of the way of Donald Trump when he got shot, and now he's holding up a Bitcoin right next to some mining rigs and ASICs as Bitcoin goes all in on MAGA, shedding its anti-government slant, which is actually the case, right? A lot of people inside of the Bitcoin community, especially well before it gained mass attention and adoption, probably before the bull run of 2017, 2018, were very libertarian and very distrusting of government. But that has changed as Donald Trump, being the most pro-crypto president in history, launching an NFT collection, actually multiple NFT collections, and also a meme coin, and then stating that he's going to create a strategic national reserve for all sorts of cryptos, not only Bitcoin, but XRP, Solana, I believe he said ADA at one point, and I can't remember the rest if he mentioned any others. That said, I believe the reason that people are beginning to hop on the MAGA train when they are complete Bitcoin maxis, or just in general love crypto, is because he's the only one that's actually moved forward on anything crypto to begin with from a governmental level. If you remember back in the Biden administration, they said in 2022 they were going to pass all sorts of legislation to make sure that they were protecting financial markets and participants. That never actually happened. They never did anything. It was all talk. Well, President Trump actually raised millions from crypto executives in the hopes, right, that he would actually pass legislation. So far, it's already made its way to the Senate, at least a bill in terms of stablecoins, which is going to drive the entire crypto market into delivering a lot of what the industry craved, dropping Biden-era lawsuits against crypto companies, which again, under Paul Atkins at the SEC, is happening across the board, and backing legislation to bring digital tokens into the financial mainstream. Now, the good news is this is completely in the tailwinds, and in the long term, we're likely going to have pretty strong price action, considering this was one of the strongest Mays. In June, we might not see that great of price action, but I think in the long term, we're good, especially with Jerome Powell finishing this speech and basically making no mention of rate cuts or a resignation, which gives markets certainty. And that's really all they want in order to do well. Anytime there's potential uncertainty or potential situations for volatility because of something that Jerome Powell might say, markets tend to sell off to de-risk. And that would be in the crypto market as well, as the crypto market is highly correlated to the stock market. Now, they're not always correlated. In the long term, I do believe crypto is going to consistently outperform. In the short term, though, we could see lower lows, especially with volume declining on virtually all crypto assets and Bitcoin consistently gaining in dominance versus everything else. Anywho, that is it for the video, folks. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and also check out Altcoin Pro University by going to altcoinpro.com. And once you get started at $97 a month, and I'm going to tell you why it's such a value, you can actually take advantage of all sorts of classes and courses, one of them being my very own Technical Analysis Essentials, which teaches you everything you need to know to be an absolute pro on the chart, whether it's learning the investment mindset and frameworks, creating your winning game plan, setting market and limit orders, which most people don't even know how to do. And I teach you how to do that directly on Coinbase, to using TradingView and drawing tools and candlesticks and bullish and bearish patterns, moving averages, EMAs, SMAs, MACD, stochastic, Bollinger Bands, Fibonacci, and what I like to call the 4 horsemen of technical analysis, which if you just used those 4 things and those 4 lessons, you could be a pro on the charts and essentially never have to rely on anyone or any analysis from any YouTuber or Twitter head in the future. And you can look at a chart and know exactly what you're looking at and how to make your own decisions. And also, we provide all sorts of resources. This one course alone is more than worth you checking it out. But if that wasn't enough, we even have a calendar that is chock full of courses, or live trainings. So for example, in June, we are hosting calls basically back to back, day after day. And here tomorrow, if you're watching this on Monday, I'm hosting a technical analysis call, and I do this basically every single Tuesday except for the 10th because I'm heading out for a wedding. But on these days, I host a live call and I show you to do technical analysis like a pro. And you can ask all sorts of questions live with me, and this is stuff we simply can't get to on the channel. So if that sounds interesting to you and you'd like to join these classes, not including our crypto catch-up calls or guest experts or state of the market, then you could take advantage of this community, which is bar none some of the best in the space, because everyone's paying to be here. Everyone's taking their journey very seriously. They all want to be very well off when it comes to crypto or have complete and total time freedom. And so the alpha is amazing. Not only do we share all sorts of things like altcoin picks and DeFi yield picks and airdrops, but just the DeFi yield picks alone can basically make your investment or money back every single month. And if you don't with one of our DeFi yield quick wins, then go ahead and ask for a refund in 14 days, no questions asked. But just to give you one example of one yield farm that is actually really safe, directly from one of our researchers and analysts, Mo, he just shared an easy yield last week that was earning on average 35% APR. In other words, if you were sitting on $3,500 of extra crypto already, you can put it to work for you and you would earn back in the year enough to pay for the membership. We've had people tossed $1,200 into one of these farms and was earning $3.30 some cents per day, which again covered their monthly costs. So everything was a free ride. And the altcoins alone are totally worth it. As just this week, we shared one altcoin, which is a total runner, and one of our members actually tossed a few G's in there and is now up $14,000 in profits and up 35.5K in 3 weeks on this one token. And this is because of our team of professional DeFi analysts and researchers. So if any of that or all of that sounds interesting to you, head on over to altcoinpro.com to check it out. Thanks so much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.